You do your hair, step back from the mirror, and something just feels off. Not the gray, not the texture, something you cannot quite name. And that vague, frustrating feeling is actually more specific than you think. It comes down to 3 things that most of us are doing without realizing it. Once you understand what they are and why they work the way they do, the fix is a lot simpler than you would expect. Let us get into it. And I want to say up front, these are not about damage or dryness. You have heard all of that, and so have I. What I want to talk about is more specific. The way hair silhouette and face shape work together and how that relationship quietly shifts on us as we get older. Once you see it, it explains a lot. And before we get into the first one, if you are new here, this channel is specifically for women over 60 who want straightforward, honest conversations about style and how to make it work for where we actually are right now. No fluff, no pressure. If that sounds like your kind of place, hit subscribe. New videos go up regularly, and I would love to have you here. Now, the first mistake. The first mistake is something I see constantly, and it is so common that most women never register it as a problem. It is a flat crown. Now, I wanted to be clear about this from the start. Volume loss at the crown is real, it is extremely common after menopause, and it is completely normal. This is not about blaming your hair for something hormones did. The mistake is not having less volume. The mistake is making styling choices that accidentally increase the flatness without realizing it. Here's why this matters. Think about what a youthful facial structure looks like. It sits high, lifted across the temples and cheekbones. As we age, that changes naturally, and we are not trying to reverse that. But the hair silhouette surrounding the face either works with that shift or against it. When the crown is flat, the entire head reads as lower and heavier. The eye travels downward, and that single visual cue registers as age in a way that is hard to describe, but very easy to feel. So what is actually creating the flatness? A few things. And most of them are hiding inside a routine you have probably had for years. The first is applying product directly to the roots at the crown. Product with hold or moisture creates weight right where you need lift the most. That hair gets pressed down rather than supported upward. And to be specific about what that means, if you are using anything heavy at the roots, a cream, an oil, even a thick serum, that is the first thing to pull back on. Something lighter does the job without the weight. A root-lifting mousse or a dry texturizing spray gives you texture and hold without pressing the hair down. That one swap makes everything else in this section work better. The second is sleeping with the crown compressed and not specifically addressing it in the morning. Whatever position you sleep in, the crown takes the pressure. And if the morning routine covers everything else without resetting that section, the compression just stays there all day. The third, and this is the most common one, is blow drying the crown in a downward direction. It makes sense to do this because it smooths the cuticle and controls frizz. But at the crown specifically, drying downward just trains the root to lay flat, and over time, that habit compounds. Here's the fix, and it requires nothing new. The next time you dry your hair, do the crown section last. Direct the airflow upward at the root, lifting the hair away from the scalp. When it is nearly dry, clip it at the root and let it finish cooling for about 30 seconds. The root sets in a lifted position and holds that way through the day. Now I know what some of you are thinking. You have been drying your hair the same way for decades and it has always been fine. And honestly, for a long time it probably was fine because the root had more natural density holding it up. What changes is that, as hair naturally thins at the crown over time, the same habit that used to be neutral starts working against you. It is not that the technique was ever wrong, it is that the hair it is working on has changed. That is the whole point of this conversation. Here's a quick self-check. Look at your hair from the side. Follow the line from your ear to the top of your head. If it goes straight across or angles slightly downward, the crown is flat. What you want to see is a gentle upward curve from the ear to the crown. That curve is the difference between a silhouette that reads as lifted and one that reads as heavy. Small adjustment, real difference, and this is where the first piece of the picture starts to come together. The second mistake is one that most of us have never questioned because it worked for so long. It is the deep, hard side part. And I want to explain what is actually happening mechanically when hair thins, because the reason the side part stops serving you is not what most people assume. The side part was a great tool for a long time. It created asymmetry, added visual volume, gave the hair a sense of movement, and it worked because the hair had enough density to support it. Both sections on either side of the part had enough volume to read as intentional framing rather than separation. As hair naturally thins, that dynamic changes. A deep, hard part on thinner hair exposes a visible scalp line. It divides the hair into two sections that are each visually thin on their own rather than reading as one cohesive, full mass. And it draws the eye directly to the point of division, which is exactly where you least want attention. There is also a compounding problem that does not get talked about enough. The longer you have had the same part in the same place, the more the hair has trained itself to fall there. The follicles angle in that direction. The hair opens along that line even when you have not combed it. The part stops being a styling choice and becomes a permanent feature of how the hair sits. And a permanent, defined scalp line reads very differently on thinner hair than it did when density was higher. Here's what to try instead. Skip the comb for the parting step. Run your fingers through slightly damp hair and guide it loosely in the direction you want. You get the impression of a part without the hard line. The scalp stays covered, the hair moves as one mass, and the whole top of the head reads as fuller because it is not divided. If your hair is gray or silver, this matters even more. On lighter hair, the contrast between the scalp and the hair strand is lower, which means the scalp line is actually more visible, not less. A hard part on silver hair reads more strongly than the same part on dark hair. Diffusing that part line is one of the simplest changes you can make. Also, try shifting the position of your part slightly every few days. Even moving it half an inch in either direction prevents the hair from collapsing into a groove it has memorized. And I want to be honest with you here. If your hair has been trained into the same part for 20 or 30 years, it is not going to shift overnight. The first few days will feel unfamiliar and the hair will want to fall back into its groove. That is normal and it does not mean it is not working. Give it a week or two of consistent mornings and the hair genuinely does begin to sit differently. It is not dramatic, but it is real. And now, here is where things start to connect. The flat crown and the hard part are both doing the same thing. They are dividing and lowering the visual weight of the hair in ways that work against the face. The third mistake completes that picture, and it is the one that surprised me most when I first understood it. Before we get there, quick pause. I am working on a dedicated follow-up specifically on face framing cuts, including the exact conversation to have with your stylist so you walk out with what you actually wanted. Hit subscribe so you do not miss that one. Now, the third mistake, it is what I call a face frame mismatch. Here's what that means. Most of us have some version of a cut we have worn for years. Maybe the length has shifted slightly, maybe the color has changed, but the general shape is familiar. And the cut may be perfectly fine on its own. The issue is that the face it was designed around has changed. The jawline has softened. The temples may have shifted slightly, the cheeks catch light a little differently than they did 10 years ago. None of those changes are dramatic individually, but together they mean the haircut is now framing a slightly different face than it was built for, and that is the source of the feeling you cannot name. Face framing layers are not decorative. They serve a precise visual function. They draw the eye toward the strongest features of the face and create a soft transition around the areas that have changed. When those layers are absent or when they are placed in a way that maps to a slightly different facial structure, the hair hangs as a single continuous weight. And that weight lands heaviest around the jaw and the temples, which is exactly where most women over 60 least want visual weight. This is where most people get it wrong. They focus on length when the real issue is frame. And here's what I am not saying. I am not saying go short. That is the default advice that has been floating around for years, and honestly, it is lazy. Length is almost never the issue. The issue is almost always the frame. Here's the specific request to bring to your next appointment. Ask for soft face framing pieces that fall between the cheekbone and the jaw on both sides. Not general layers, not thinning across the whole head. Specifically, face framing pieces, cheekbone to jaw. That request targets the exact area where the relationship between the hair and the face needs refreshing. It softens the transition at the jaw, creates movement at the temples, and draws the eye upward toward the cheekbone rather than downward. You can keep your length exactly as it is. You can keep the color, the overall shape, all of it. That one adjustment, face framing pieces from the cheekbone to the jaw, can make your existing style look and feel significantly more current without touching the length. It will not solve everything in one appointment, but it is the most targeted change you can make to the frame of your face without starting over. And I want to acknowledge something real here. If you have sat in that chair before and described what you wanted and still walked out with something different, you are not alone. That happens more than it should. If it does, the answer is not to give up on the conversation. It is to bring a reference photo, even a rough one. A picture of someone whose framing you like, not necessarily the whole style, just the way the hair sits around the face. That single image does more than any description ever will. These three things are connected. They are all about the same underlying shift. The relationship between your hair and your face has changed, and the habits and cuts that used to serve you without any thought are now asking for a small update. That is all this is. Not a reinvention, an update. Lift the crown, soften the part, refresh the frame. You do not need to change everything. You just need to know what to change. If any of this felt familiar, I would love to know which one in the comments. The crown, the part, or the face frame. I have a feeling most of us have at least one of them, and I read every comment. Give this a like if it helped. It genuinely gets this content in front of more women who need it. Subscribe if you are not already, and I will see you in the next one.